Picture this. You're sitting in the back of a really tense, sterile corporate boardroom in Tokyo.
Oh, man. The classic high-stakes environment.
Exactly. And at the table, there's this team of Japanese executives, and they're facing off against a visiting delegation of European vice presidents.
Yeah, and it's not going well, is it?
No, it's a disaster. For like 2 grueling hours, the European side has just been smoothly, eloquently dodging responsibility for this massive, catastrophic shipping delay.
Classic run-out-the-clock strategy.
Exactly. They run the clock down. The meeting is basically over.
Yeah.
The European VP is smiling. He's packing his briefcase, perfectly content because he's leaving the room without having made a single concrete commitment. He totally thinks he's won.
Mm-hmm.
And then this junior employee in the back of the room, someone who literally hasn't spoken the entire meeting, someone who's spoken English is actually really rusty and, lacks that native fluency. He raises his hand.
The tension in that room must have been unreal.
Right. He cuts through all the polite corporate chatter, glares directly at the European VP, and shatters the entire dynamic of the room with just 3 words. He says, walk the talk.
Wow. Yeah, it completely paralyzes the room. Those 3 words they freeze the European delegation in their tracks, strip away all the polite excuses, and force a hard, immediate commitment.
It's like a tactical strike.
Exactly. Deployed with absolute precision.
And today, we are going to reverse engineer the mind of the man who threw that strike. We're stepping directly into the muddy waters of international business, and I want to speak directly to you, our listener, right now.
Yes, because we know exactly who you are and why you're tuning in today.
We do. You are a female college student in Japan. You're pouring all your energy into your English studies, and you have this burning ambition to one day handle complex, high-stakes international business transactions yourself.
You want to be the person in that boardroom.
Exactly. You've read the personal essays written by this specific author, the guy who dropped that 3-word bombshell, and, well, you admire his trajectory. You're looking for a bridge between the academic English you're studying in the library right now and the actual blood and sweat reality of global commerce.
And so our mission for this deep dive is custom tailored just for you. We aren't just going to summarize his life story. That's not what we do here.
No, definitely not. We're going to extract the underlying mechanics of his success. Like, how do you actually acquire this author's style of English? What's the cognitive and psychological blueprint for moving from a frustrated student to a master negotiator?
Right, someone who can literally control a room full of seasoned executives. We've got a fascinating stack of his personal essays that cover, everything from his childhood struggles with pronunciation to his teenage leaps of faith, all the way to his ultimate philosophy on corporate empathy and, human psychology.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand that mastery, we really have to look at the genesis of his method. His approach to language acquisition completely subverts how we traditionally teach English, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the instinct in a traditional classroom is to treat language like a mathematical code.
Right, like an equation.
Yeah. You memorize a vocabulary list,
Mm-hmm.
you plug those words into a grammatical formula, and you output a structurally sound sentence.
Which feels safe, It's measurable.
It is safe. But the most counterintuitive part of the author's journey is that when he tried to rely on that safe, structural approach back in middle school, it just backfired spectacular.
Oh, totally. He fell into the classic trap of what's known in Japan as katakana English.
Mm-hmm.
He was trying to map foreign sounds onto a domestic grid.
That's a really great way to visualize it, because Japanese and English are fundamentally different on a phonological level. Japanese is what we call a mora-timed language.
Meaning every syllable takes up roughly the same amount of time, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the vowel sounds are very pure, very limited. But English is a stressed timed language. It's full of strange vowel clusters, swallowed consonants, and just a completely different rhythm.
Right.
So when the author first started middle school, he was totally baffled by this.
Yeah.
He heard his teacher say the word mailman, and his brain just didn't know how to process it. So he relied on his native grid. He wrote down Meidu man in katakana.
Which is fascinating cognitively if you think about it. He wasn't just spelling it wrong. He was actively rewriting the auditory data to fit what his brain already knew how to process.
Yeah, he was forcing an English peg into a Japanese hole.
But if you take Meidu man to New York and ask for one, literally nobody is going to hand you your letters.
Exactly. No one. And he realized very quickly that this was a dead end. He actually felt like he'd wasted his entire first semester because the gap between the spelling of the word and the physical sound it made was completely unbridged.
But the turning point didn't come from a teacher, did it?
No, it didn't. It came from, of all places, the back pages of an English conversation book he found at a bookstore. He discovered the International Phonetic Alphabet.
Oh, wow. Those little strange phonetic symbols printed next to words in the dictionary.
Exactly.
For a lot of students, those symbols are just visual noise, like they just ignore them. But for him, it was a total revelation. Why did those specific squiggles change everything?
Because they bypassed that katakana grid entirely. The phonetic symbols gave him a new, dedicated set of instructions for his mouth. He realized that language isn't just like data transfer, it's a physiological action.
Yeah, you have to actually train your diaphragm, your tongue, your teeth, and your lips to move in ways they have literally never moved before.
Right. You have to physically build the muscle memory for the difference between an L and an R or a TH sound.
And this is where his method shifts from like academic study to pure physical obsession. He didn't sit in his room reciting the dictionary, he went straight to pop culture.
The Beatles,
Yeah.
the Carpenters.
Yes, he used their records as an intensive athletic training ground. He wanted to sing along, which meant he couldn't just get the sounds right. He had to master the speed, the breath control, and the rhythm.
The essays detail this grueling, self-imposed training camp. I mean, he fixated on one specific rapid-fire lyric from the Beatles song, Please, Please Me.
Oh, I know the one.
Yeah, the line is,
Mhm.
I don't want to sound complaining, but you know there's always rain in my heart.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that specific line for a second. Because for a Japanese middle schooler in the 1970s, saying, there's always rain, at the exact tempo of a rock song, that is a monumental physical barrier.
Oh, it requires an entirely different use of the vocal tract.
Hmm.
To hit the contraction there's
Mm-hmm.
and immediately slide into the vowel of always and then transition to the R in rain without pausing, without inserting extra vowels like you would in katakana, requires immense facial flexibility.
Yeah.
He practiced that single phrase dozens, maybe hundreds of times. He would hit the word no, stumble on the transition, stop the record, and just start over.
It sounds like an athlete running drills, like a basketball player shooting free throws until his arms go numb.
That is the exact psychological state he was in. He wasn't studying for a test. He was trying to break through a physical limitation. And when he finally nailed that lyric, matching John Lennon's speed and rhythm perfectly, he literally clapped his hands in joy in his bedroom.
That's amazing. But wait, let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because I know you, our listener, are probably thinking about your upcoming grammar exams.
Right, the practical application.
Yeah, like, isn't treating language like a song kind of dangerous? I mean, you might sound great mimicking a lyric, but you aren't actually learning how to build a sentence. You're just a parrot. Doesn't this ignore the necessary structural foundation of English?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the author avoids that exact trap. That's a highly logical critique, but this is where his genius really shows. He didn't stop at mimicry.
He didn't.
No, he used the rhythm as a Trojan horse for syntax. Once he had the physical rhythm of a song locked in, he started manipulating the variables.
Oh, interesting. How so?
He would take a song like She Loves You, and while walking down the street, he would actively swap the pronouns in his head. He would sing, he loves you, or they love you, forcing his brain to adjust the verb conjugations on the fly, all while maintaining that musical tempo.
Oh, wow. That is brilliant. He's doing grammar drills, but he's doing them at 120 beats per minute.
Exactly. He was stretching the language, making it flexible. By attaching grammatical rules to a physical rhythm, he moved the knowledge from his prefrontal cortex, the slow analytical part of the brain, into his basal ganglia.
Which handles fast, automatic motor habits.
Precisely.
It makes me think of learning to dance. You know, you can buy a book on the tango, you can stare at a piece of paper with little black footprints drawn on it, and intellectually memorize where your left foot is supposed to go on beat 3.
Right.
But you cannot actually dance the tango until you step onto the floor, feel the music in your chest, and, you know, probably step on your partner's toes a few times. The author's style demands that you stop staring at the footprints and start feeling the music.
And that transition from passive observer to active participant requires a massive amount of vulnerability, which brings us to the psychological engine driving his entire journey, because finding the rhythm is totally useless if you don't have the courage to actually deploy it when the stakes are real.
Which is a perfect pivot, honestly, because the author's essays make it incredibly clear that his language skills didn't evolve in a vacuum. They evolved because he continually engineered situations of absolute desperation for himself.
Yes, engineered desperation.
He intentionally backed himself into corners where failing was not an option or where the desire to succeed was so overwhelming that it just short circuited his fear. Let's look at his ninth grade year. He's just a middle schooler, but he decides he wants to take the Eichen Level 2 exam.
Which is a high school graduation level test. He was completely out of his depth. I mean, he looked at the vocabulary requirements and realized he was vastly underprepared. The rational part of his brain told him to just wait a few years. He was so terrified of failing that he hadn't even submitted the application through his school.
Because he didn't want the embarrassment of his teachers seeing a rejection notice.
Exactly. He was paralyzed by the amygdala response. His brain was treating the potential of a failed test like a literal physical threat.
But then a very human, very emotional variable enters the equation.
His first love.
Yes. He had developed this massive crush on an older trainee nurse at a local hospital where he was receiving treatment for joint inflammation. He would go every day, mostly just to see her.
Ah, young love.
Right. And one afternoon, he confesses to her that he's hesitating to take this advanced English exam. He's looking for comfort. He wants her to validate his fear and tell him it's okay to back down.
And she completely refuses to play that game.
She does.
She shatters his rationalization. She looks at him and delivers a line of such profound, blunt logic that it alters his entire trajectory. She says, if you don't take it, you won't pass. You lose nothing by failing.
You lose nothing by failing. It's so simple, yet it completely neutralizes the ego.
Mechanically, what she did was reframe the baseline. His brain was operating on the assumption that failing the test would mean a loss of status, a loss of intelligence. She pointed out the mathematical reality. If he doesn't take the test, he doesn't have the certification. If he takes the test and fails, he still doesn't have the certification. His net loss is exactly zero.
Wow.
The author notes that this phrase flipped a psychological switch. The fear just evaporated because the illusion of risk was exposed.
He applied that day, took the test, and passed. And the beautiful part is his realization years later. She wasn't giving him academic advice.
No.
She was an older woman looking at a young boy, and she wanted to see if he had the spine to take a risk. She was testing his character, not his grammar.
And he carried that exact same manufactured courage right into high school, where he faced an even more severe crisis. He'd been placed in the science and math tracks, but he was failing miserably.
Yeah, he realized that to have any future, he desperately needed to pivot to the humanities.
Right. And he discovered there was a single university recommendation spot available for a prestigious English department. To get it, he made an utterly reckless promise to his teacher. He guaranteed he would take first place in the entire grade on the upcoming massive English exam.
Talk about engineering desperation. He basically burns his own boats. If he doesn't take first place, he loses his academic future. So how does he guarantee victory? Because you don't guarantee first place just by reviewing your workbook.
You definitely don't. He decided to bypass standard studying entirely. He memorized Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech.
Wait, the entire thing?
Entire 16-minute, 10-page speech.
That is absurd. The cognitive load required to memorize a 16-minute speech in a foreign language is staggering. Why would he do that for a written grammar test?
Because he implicitly understood that syntax and vocabulary are absorbed exponentially faster when they're attached to high emotional resonance. He admits he didn't even understand all the historical context of the civil rights movement at the time.
Sure.
But he felt the sheer, undeniable force of the rhetoric, the repetition, the cadence, the emotional peaks and valleys of King's delivery. By memorizing the speech, he wasn't just memorizing words. He was downloading the architectural blueprint of advanced English persuasion directly into his nervous system.
He recited it to the head of the English department, secured the recommendation, and got into the university. It's a massive triumph. But then, almost immediately, the universe humbles him again.
Oh, big time. He attends a summer prep school session and witnesses a model debate put on by college freshmen from the very university he is about to enter.
And this is a critical moment of psychological friction, right?
Extremely critical. He watches these students, who are only a year or two older than him, engage in a rapid-fire, highly intellectual debate entirely in English. I mean, they're arguing complex propositions for 8 minutes straight, cross-examining each other, thinking on their feet.
Wow.
The author describes sitting in the audience and feeling utter despair. The gap between his memorized speeches and their dynamic, combative fluency was astronomical. He felt like his English was basically non-existent.
Now, hold on. Despair is usually the emotion that makes people quit. When you realize the mountain is 10 times higher than you thought, the natural human instinct is to turn around. Why did this despair work for him instead of crushing him?
Because of the emotional anchors he had already built. The nurse taught him that failure costs nothing. The MLK speech taught him the physical high of mastering rhetoric. So when he felt that despair, his brain didn't process it as a stop sign. It processed it as a targeting
Ooh,
system.
targeting system. I love that.
Yeah, the despair crystallized his goal. He looked at those debaters and thought, I want to be able to do exactly that.
So, to you, our listener, studying right now in the library, the takeaway here isn't just try hard. The takeaway is the strategy of engineered desperation. If you want to acquire this author's style, you cannot stay in the comfortable shallows of textbook learning.
You really can't.
You must intentionally place yourself in arenas where you are completely outclassed. You need an emotional anchor, whether it's impressing someone you admire, securing a job that feels out of reach, or simply refusing to be the quietest person in a room full of global debaters. You have to put yourself in a situation where the demand for English is so intense that your brain has no choice but to rewire itself to survive.
But here is where the story takes a wildly unexpected turn, because the transition from that intense academic mastery to the actual corporate battlefield reveals a massive paradox.
Yes, this is the core of his professional evolution. He goes to university, masters debate, studies abroad, and builds this elite level of fluency. But then he enters a traditional Japanese corporate environment.
And for the first dozen years of his career, he barely uses English at all.
Exactly. The essays contain this shocking admission. He actually lost his collegiate fluency. His vocabulary shrank. His reaction time slowed. He felt his speaking skills visibly deteriorating.
Yet, during that exact same period of linguistic deterioration, he evolves into a master international negotiator.
Okay, we need to break this down mechanically. How do you get objectively worse at speaking English, but exponentially better at doing business in English? That feels like a contradiction.
It feels like a contradiction until you separate the concept of fluency from the concept of impact. The author had an epiphany while watching a boss early in his career. This boss did not have perfect grammar. He did not speak in long, flowing, complex sentences.
But his English possessed a quality the author describes as aji, which translates to flavor or distinct character.
Exactly. Flavor, meaning it wasn't a pristine glass of water, it was a shot of espresso.
I like that.
The boss's English was deliberate, punchy, and utterly devoid of ambiguity. If the goal was to demand quality improvement from a factory, he didn't construct a polite, passive voice paragraph. He looked the person in the eye, said quality improvement, and then repeated it, rephrased it, and hammered it into the conversation until it was the only thing that mattered.
Right.
The author realized that in the theater of international business, linguistic proficiency does not automatically equal business acumen.
Which brings us back to the incredible scene we opened the show with, the walk the talk boardroom showdown. Let's look at the mechanics of why that moment worked so perfectly, because it wasn't just about what he said, it was about the cultural and psychological ecosystem of that specific room.
To understand the power of that moment, you have to understand the typical Japanese business opening, which the moderator of that meeting employed flawlessly. The Japanese team was facing a crisis, a massive shipping delay from a European vendor that was hurting their bottom line. But instead of leading with the problem, the Japanese moderator opened with deep harmony-seeking behavior. He said, "Thank you for coming all the way from Europe. We really appreciate your continued support. You must be so tired from the flight."
It's the ritual of establishing politeness before conflict.
Exactly.
But the European executives, operating from a different cultural playbook, interpreted that politeness as weakness. They instantly realized the Japanese side was avoiding direct confrontation.
Precisely. They capitalized on that opening. They spent the next 2 hours controlling the narrative, making complex excuses, citing supply chain anomalies, and dodging any direct responsibility. They manipulated the polite atmosphere to run the clock down.
Yep.
The meeting is wrapping up, no solutions have been recorded, and the European VP is smiling, offering closing pleasantries about how well they understand each other.
And the author, sitting in the back, recognizing that his own English is rusty and deteriorating, knows he cannot jump in and debate them on the intricacies of supply chain logistics. He doesn't have the vocabulary or the fluency to win a 2-hour battle of words.
So he changes the rules of engagement. He doesn't fight them on fluency, he fights them on impact.
Yes.
He raises his hand, shattering the polite closing ritual. He glares at the VP, ignoring the hierarchy of the room, and says, "I don't think our company's message is getting through. What we want to say is, walk the talk."
It's a linguistic kill shot.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to push back here because I can hear our listener getting a bit anxious. She's aiming for a career where she's drafting complex contracts and leading teams. Doesn't grammar matter?
I see what you mean.
Like if you walk into a boardroom and just shout idioms with terrible grammar, won't you just look incompetent? Isn't the author basically saying, don't worry about studying, just be aggressive?
Not at all. And the author is very careful to clarify this distinction. He is absolutely not advocating for sloppy, broken English. He explicitly states that a baseline of solid, accurate grammar is vital because in business, grammatical errors can lead to catastrophic legal or financial misunderstandings.
He gives that great example of the difference between frustrating and frustrated.
Right. If you are in a tense negotiation and you want to express that your team is upset with the vendor's performance, you must know the grammatical difference between saying, we are frustrating and we are frustrated.
Because they mean completely opposite things.
Exactly. If you say, we are frustrating, you are telling the vendor that you are annoying them. You instantly lose the high ground and confuse the entire room. If you say, we are frustrated, you communicate your anger. That baseline accuracy is non-negotiable.
So accuracy is the entry fee. You have to pay it to get into the room. But once you are in the room, perfect, continuous fluency is not the weapon that wins the deal.
The weapon is timing. The weapon is reading the room, understanding the psychological state of your opponent, and deploying your words at the exact moment their defenses drop.
Right, like when the VP thought the meeting was over.
Exactly. His guard was down. The phrase walk the talk worked because it was unexpected, it was colloquial, and it cut through 2 hours of corporate jargon to demand immediate physical action. The author controlled the room not by speaking the most, but by speaking at the perfect second.
And that tactical approach to language naturally bleeds into his broader philosophy on the psychology of corporate warfare. Because for the author, negotiation is not really about numbers, it's an exercise in behavioral economics. This brings us to his brilliant use of the peak end rule.
Yes, the peak end rule is a well-documented psychological heuristic coined by Daniel Kahneman. It posits that human beings do not remember an experience as a complete chronological movie. We don't average out our emotions over a 2-hour meeting.
Which is how you'd think memory works, but it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. Instead, our brain takes 2 critical snapshots, how we felt at the absolute peak of the emotional intensity and how we felt at the very end. The brain uses those 2 snapshots to construct the entire memory of the event.
So how does the author weaponize this cognitive bias in a global supply negotiation?
He uses it to win the immediate battle while simultaneously securing long-term trust. Imagine a scenario where a vendor comes to the table demanding a 10% price increase. The author will engage in absolute trench warfare.
Just brutal back and forth.
Yeah. He will fight tooth and nail, pulling every lever available, threatening to extend delivery times, altering payment terms, auditing their material costs. It is a grueling, exhausting process that grinds the vendor's 10% demand down to, say, 8.1%. That brutal grind is the peak of the experience. Both sides are defensive and fatigued.
The vendor feels like they're bleeding for every single cent.
But then, as the negotiation reaches its final moments, the end phase of the peak end rule, the author intentionally yields. He offers a mathematically insignificant concession without being asked.
Oh, wow.
He might say, look, we've pushed you hard on the delivery dates. Why don't we just round this off to a clean 7.8%? Or he'll simply give up that final 0.1% of margin to let them hit a specific target.
He hands them a victory on a silver platter right before they walk out the door. But why? If he fought so hard for the rest of it, why give away corporate margin just to be nice?
Because he isn't being nice. He is hacking their memory. By yielding at the very end, he ensures that the final emotional snapshot that vendor's brain records is one of relief, gratitude, and a sense of triumph.
That is so smart.
When that vendor flies back to Europe and reports to their CEO, they won't dwell on the grueling 2 hours where they lost ground. They will remember the magnanimous concession at the end. The author sacrifices 0.1% of immediate profit to rewrite the vendor's memory, ensuring that the next time they sit down at the table, the vendor approaches him as a trusted partner, not a hostile enemy.
It is incredibly Machiavellian, but wrapped in empathy. However, there is a limit to this empathy, and he draws a very sharp, unapologetic line when it comes to the law. He has a very strict philosophy regarding contracts versus emotion.
Yes, and this is crucial for you, our listener, who wants to operate at the highest levels of international trade. In day-to-day business, especially in cultures that highly value harmony, there is a natural human instinct to rely on relationships when a minor error occurs.
Sure, like if a supplier ships a slightly off spec product, the instinct is to say, oh, don't worry about it. We've done business for a decade. It's fine.
It's the desire to be the good guy, to not make a fuss.
But let me push back again. If you enforce every single line of a contract over every tiny mistake, don't you become a nightmare to work with? Doesn't rigid enforcement actually destroy the trust he was just trying to build with the peak end role?
It seems contradictory, but the author warns vehemently against letting emotion blur legal boundaries. Because of the concept of precedent, he argues that contracts do not exist to govern a relationship when things are going well. Contracts exist exclusively for the moment the relationship breaks down.
Oh, I see.
If you let a minor mistake slide on goodwill today, and you don't document the breach, you establish a legal and operational precedent. 6 months later, when the exact same mistake causes a massive financial catastrophe, you cannot suddenly point to the contract. The vendor will rightfully argue that you accepted the behavior previously.
So you have to separate your psychological desire to be liked from the objective reality of corporate liability. You check the contract before you let your emotions dictate your response. You can still be polite, but you must formally address the breach.
Exactly. And this ability to navigate human vulnerability and structural rules extends far beyond external negotiations. He applies the same psychological framework to internal corporate dynamics, specifically the age-old friction between operational frontline departments and corporate administrative staff.
Ah, the eternal battle. The people on the factory floor making the product versus the people in the glass offices making the rules. It is universally toxic in almost every large company.
It really is.
The frontline workers think the corporate planners are elitist bureaucrats who don't understand reality. The corporate staff thinks the frontline is stubborn, resistant to efficiency, and constantly complaining. The standard management advice is always, we need to cross-train. We need to understand each other's work better.
And the author fundamentally rejects that advice.
Yeah.
He says understanding the work is entirely secondary. The primary goal, the only way to actually resolve the friction, is understanding the person. The animosity doesn't stem from a lack of operational knowledge, it stems from a lack of human trust. The frontline workers are dealing with strangers who hold arbitrary power over their daily routines.
So how does he fix it?
He insists that the corporate staff, the ones holding the structural power, must be the ones to break the ice. They have to go down to the front line, not with a clipboard to audit their efficiency, but to build human rapport. If a frontline worker trusts a corporate planner as an actual human being, they will tell them the unvarnished truth about why a new protocol is failing.
And if they don't trust them?
They will simply nod, smile, and then quietly ignore the rule the second the planner leaves.
It's about creating an environment where vulnerability is safe, which ties directly into a Japanese concept he uses called okame hachimoku. It roughly translates to the bystander's vantage point.
Yes, when you are deep in the weeds of drafting a massive project or writing a complex proposal, you develop cognitive blind spots.
Yeah.
You literally cannot see the flaws in your own logic because you are too close to it. You desperately need an outside perspective. But human ego makes that terrifying. Showing an unfinished, flawed project to a colleague feels like exposing your incompetence.
But the author reframes this brilliantly. He compares it to a master tailor doing a fitting for a bespoke suit. You don't cut the fabric, sew the entire suit perfectly, press it, and then hand it to the client hoping it miraculously fits. You baste it together loosely with white thread. You put it on the client, you see where the shoulders pull, you see where the fabric bunches. You actively seek out the flaws. You use the bystander's perspective as a diagnostic tool. You have to invite criticism early and often rather than hiding from it out of pride.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture for our listener, aiming for the C-suite, mastering international business is not just a matter of understanding macroeconomics or supply chain logistics. It is fundamentally a masterclass in human psychology.
Yeah.
Being a formidable negotiator isn't about crushing your opponent into submission. It is about structured empathy. It is knowing exactly when to yield 0.1% to rewrite their memory, knowing when to coldly rely on the ink of the contract to prevent liability, and knowing how to navigate the messy, ego-driven friction within your own organization. You are managing human emotions just as aggressively as you are managing capital.
That is incredibly profound. And it's this deep, almost spiritual understanding of the human condition that naturally evolves into the author's current phase of life. He's no longer fighting in the corporate boardrooms. He spends his time volunteering, mentoring, and teaching English and math to middle and high school students. And he brings his radical pragmatism to the classroom through his advocacy for a teaching methodology called CLIL.
Right, CLIL stands for Content and Language Integrated Learning. It is a massive departure from the traditional Japanese method of grammar translation, the exact method the author struggled with as a child. In grammar translation, the goal is to look at an English sentence, dissect its syntax, and translate it perfectly into Japanese to prove comprehension. The language is the object being studied under a microscope.
But CLIL flips that entirely. CLIL is about learning about a subject, whether it's world history, environmental science, or local geography, through the medium of English. English is no longer the subject, it is the vehicle. It is the tool used to acquire other knowledge. The author champions this because it mirrors how the human brain naturally acquires its native tongue.
It creates genuine engagement because the student is focused on the content, not the syntax. But the author notes a deeply frustrating reality. There is massive entrenched resistance to CLIL from older, veteran teachers in the Japanese education system.
And the reason why is heartbreakingly human. It's pride. CLIL requires the teacher to actually speak conversational English fluidly in front of the classroom while discussing complex topics. Many veteran teachers are absolute masters of written grammar and translation, but they lack conversational fluency. They are terrified of exposing their wobbly speaking skills to a room full of teenagers.
They prioritize the protection of their own authority over the cognitive development of their students. To counter this, the author leans heavily on the ethics of mentorship, drawing on the educational psychology concept of the zone of proximal development, or a ZPD.
This is a vital concept for anyone who ever wants to lead a team. Walk us through the mechanics of ZPD.
The ZPD is the cognitive gap between what a learner can accomplish completely independently and what they can achieve with the guidance of a skilled mentor. The teacher's role is to enter that zone and provide scaffolding, temporary structural support. You give the student frameworks, you guide their logic, you help them climb higher than they could on their own. But the most critical and most difficult phase of scaffolding is knowing when to dismantle it.
You have to step away, but let me challenge that. Why is stepping away so hard? If you are a good teacher, shouldn't you be thrilled that the student doesn't need you anymore?
Ideally, yes. But human ego is complicated. The author admits with startling honesty that watching a student you mentored suddenly surpass your own abilities can trigger a sharp twinge of professional jealousy. When the scaffolding comes down, the mentor realizes they are no longer the most important person in the room. The mentor has to suppress their ego, step back into the shadows, and allow the generational handover to occur. True mentorship is an act of self-erasure.
That requires an immense level of self-awareness. You have to be deeply attuned to your own internal emotional state. And that self-awareness introduces perhaps the most deeply personal and philosophical realization the author shares in these essays. It is a concept he refers to as the unvoiced voice.
It's a beautiful phrase. He borrows the term from political science, where it usually refers to the silent majority or the unspoken, disenfranchised needs of a populace, but he recontextualizes it entirely as a metaphor for personal health and somatic psychology. He realizes that just as a society has unvoiced needs, our own physical bodies and our subconscious minds have unvoiced voices that we systematically ignore.
We suppress them because modern corporate life demands it. We are stressed, we are trying to meet deadlines, we are running on caffeine, so we tune out the signal that our bodies are sending us.
He illustrates this with a deeply personal story. He decided to start running for his health. He didn't do it to run a marathon. He had a highly specific emotional goal. He wanted to ensure he would be physically fit enough to go on a date with his granddaughter in 20 years. So he starts jogging, and he observes a very specific physiological phenomenon. Every single time he runs, without fail, the physical pain, the lactic acid buildup, and the overwhelming mental desire to stop peaks at exactly the 2-minute mark.
His central nervous system is panicking. The unvoiced voice of his body is screaming, "Stop! We are exerting too much energy."
Most people react to that peak in one of two ways. They either completely ignore it, push through blindly and injure themselves, or they listen to the panic and quit. The author does neither. He acknowledges the voice. He recognizes that the 2-minute mark is a physiological crucible. By listening to that signal and understanding its pattern, he calmly pushes through the 2-minute barrier, trusting the neuroplasticity and adaptability of his body. He knows the pain is a temporary transition state, not a permanent warning.
And he applies that same somatic listening to his general health. He talks about paying attention to MIBU, or pre-disease. recognizing that a mild headache or a stiff neck isn't just a nuisance to be silenced with a painkiller so he can get back to work. It is his body's unvoiced voice pleading for hydration, rest, or a change in posture.
So, for our listener, how do you integrate this into your pursuit of mastery? If you want to achieve the author's level of success in international business, you must cultivate the ability to listen to your own unvoiced voices. When you are buried in English textbooks at midnight and you feel a wave of profound exhaustion or frustration, do not just blindly power through and do not quit in despair. Interrogate the feeling. Is your brain telling you that this method of rote memorization is failing? Is your subconscious demanding that you connect the vocabulary to something you actually care about? You must respect your physical limits and understand your genuine intrinsic motivations. If you are deaf to your own internal signals, you will never possess the empathy required to read the unvoiced needs of a vendor across a negotiation table.
It all comes back to a radical acceptance of reality, including our own flaws. Which brings us to the final, and I think the most moving theme of his entire body of work: the author's deep, abiding appreciation for human imperfection. He has a worldview that completely rejects the sterile, robotic perfection that corporate life often demands.
And he grounds this philosophy in a brilliant visual metaphor. He shares a story about watching a professional athlete on television perform a body awareness exercise. The instructions were simple. Stand perfectly straight in front of a mirror, close your eyes, and raise your arms out to your sides until you believe they are perfectly horizontal, parallel to the floor.
It sounds incredibly easy. Every human thinks they know where their arms are in space.
The author tries it. He stands in his room, closes his eyes, raises his arms, feels completely balanced and symmetrical, and then opens his eyes. He's horrified. His arms are entirely crooked. One is pointing up, the other is drooping down. He writes that he looked exactly like a broken yajirobe, which is a traditional Japanese balancing toy made of bamboo that wobbles back and forth on a pivot.
He is confronted with the undeniable physical proof that he is not in control of his own body. His internal perception of perfection is a complete illusion.
But instead of feeling embarrassed or trying to train himself to be perfect, he elevates this yajirobe moment into a guiding philosophy for life and business. He realizes that every single human being is a yajirobe. We are all physically asymmetrical. We are all emotionally uncoordinated. We say things we deeply regret. We fail to articulate the things we truly mean. We carry biases and we make illogical decisions. We are all fundamentally wobbly.
And the magic of the yajirobe philosophy is that acknowledging that lack of control is the prerequisite for genuine human connection. If you walk into a boardroom or a classroom pretending that you have perfect emotional and intellectual symmetry, you build an impenetrable wall. You become intimidating, but you become entirely unrelatable. If you admit that you are a yajirobe, you give the people around you permission to be human too.
He traces this understanding of imperfection directly back to his parents. He describes his father as a brilliant, strict man who demanded absolute perfection in reading and writing. But that demand for perfection backfired. It made the author resent reading for years. His mother, however, was fundamentally imperfect when it came to academics. She struggled to comprehend basic mathematical exponents. But despite her intellectual limitations, she possessed immense emotional warmth. She was the one who beautifully taught him the joy of handwriting and basic multiplication through play, patience, and laughter. He realized that different imperfections serve vital roles in how we grow. Her lack of mathematical perfection was the very thing that allowed her to be a gentle, effective teacher.
So we have to ask the ultimate question. What does this all mean for you, our listener? You want to conquer the international business world. You want to negotiate contracts in Tokyo, London, and New York. You've been taking notes on everything from the Beatles to the Pecan Rule. What is the final essence of the author's style?
The essence is this. The mastery of English and the mastery of business is not about becoming a flawless, error-free machine. It is not about scrubbing away your accent, or never making a grammatical mistake, or hiding your weaknesses behind a wall of corporate jargon.
It is about maintaining the warmth of handwritten cursive in a cold, digital world. The author actively laments the disappearance of cursive writing in modern education because he believes that handwritten letters, with all their messy loops, their irregularities, and their unique rhythms, carry the literal body temperature of the writer. Your English, no matter how advanced it gets, must always carry your body temperature.
It is about weaponizing your vulnerabilities. The author recognized that he naturally possessed a relatively soft-speaking voice. In a boardroom full of loud, aggressive executives, the instinct is to yell to be heard. But he didn't. He weaponized his imperfection. He used that soft voice strategically. He would speak slowly, lower his volume, choose his words with surgical precision, and look the opponent dead in the eye. By speaking softly, he forced the entire room to quiet down. He forced the powerful European executives to physically lean in across the table just to hear him. He turned to perceived physical weakness into a massive center of gravity.
That is the ultimate flex. Let's bring this all together into the blueprint we promised you at the start of this deep dive. If you want to step into the author's shoes, here is your path forward. First, stop treating English like a math equation and immerse yourself in its physical rhythm. Don't just read the footprints on the floor, feel the music in your mouth. Second, engineer your own desperation. Force yourself into arenas where you are outclassed and find an emotional anchor that compels you to survive and adapt. Third, when you reach the business battlefield, prioritize the flavor, the impact, and the timing of your words over continuous, flawless speaking. Know exactly when to strike with a phrase like walk the talk. Fourth, negotiate with structured empathy. Use Kahneman's peak end rule to build long-term trust, but always fiercely separate your emotional desire to be liked from the objective reality of a contract. Finally, embrace your inner Yajirobe. Acknowledge your wobbles, listen to the unvoiced voices of your mind and body, and ensure your communication always carries your unique human body temperature.
It is an incredibly powerful, deeply human blueprint. But before we sign off, there's one final, provocative concept from the author's essays that I want to leave you with. It's a concept that challenges everything we think we know about communication. We've spent this entire deep dive analyzing words, how to pronounce them, how to memorize them, how to deploy them. But the author introduces a phenomenon rooted in cognitive science regarding the absence of words. He points out that neurological studies show the human brain actually perceives a continuous period of silence as being longer and more emotionally impactful than a period of broken continuous sound. He distills this into a brilliant maxim: one silence is more.
One silence is more. It gives me chills.
The auditory cortex doesn't just shut off when speaking stops. It processes the sudden absence of sound as a distinct, heavy, tangible signal. Silence creates a vacuum, and human beings are psychologically terrified of vacuums. We rush to fill them.
So, here is our final challenge to you, our listener. Tomorrow, when you are in your English class, or years from now, when you are sitting in your very first high-stakes international negotiation in a glass boardroom. Wait, sorry, I didn't mean to trail off there. I mean, when the pressure reaches its absolute peak and a question is asked and there is a pause. Instead of panicking, instead of frantically searching your brain for the perfect vocabulary word to fill the gap and relieve the tension, what if you intentionally did nothing? What if you used silence?
What if you allowed that heavy, tangible silence to stretch out? What if you let it echo? By holding the silence, you alter the flow of time in the room. You project absolute confidence. You make the executives across the table sweat. You make them wait for your next move, and you command the space without uttering a single syllable, just like the author did.
It is the ultimate move of a master, to control the room not just with the music of the language, but with the heavy, powerful pauses between the notes. We are so incredibly thrilled that you joined us for this custom-tailored deep dive today. We know the path to international business is intense, it's muddy, and it's demanding. But armed with this blueprint, you are more than ready to step off the textbook page and truly feel the music. Step confidently into your global journey. We are rooting for you every step of the way.